I am Derrick Austin.
And I'm Kaladan. Hello, hi, and how are you? Welcome to another tangent episode of Referential. You are sitting in on my conversation with Derrick Austin. Derrick is a thinker, writer, and award-winning poet for the collections Tenderness and Trouble the Water. Check those out, they'll be linked to the show notes. And he's also working on the upcoming This Elegance, which you should keep an eye on because I'm sure it'll be as beautiful as everything else he's written. Derrick is also a bona fide vampire stan and expert, so I just had to have him come on the podcast to talk all about Interview with the Vampire with me. We delve into everything book 1 in Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles. So that means our thoughts on the books, the original 94 adaptation starring Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, and Kirsten Dunst, directed by Neil Jordan. And then we get into the 2 seasons of the most recent TV adaptation, AMC's Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire. Enjoy the conversation, and I will be back here at the end with notes. Let's go! This is the podcast. It's less glamorous from this end. We just chit chat. How are you, Derrick? Hi, Derrick. Introduce yourself. Who are you? Why are you here? Why are you in my home?
Nobody's supposed to be here.
Hello. I am Derrick Austin. I am a poet, primarily is what I do. I'm here to get down and figure out what kind of interview this was. We are here to talk about Interview with the Vampire.
We've been, I think, had eyes on each other on Twitters for a while, and I'm really excited I got the chance because I think I called you the vampire expert or on my timeline. And so I really want to get into it because personally, I always identified as vampire agnostic. So I have the history, I know the stuff, I did film studies, so we went through the whole Dracula shit. And now I'm like, all right, I kind of stayed away from it, from my fantasy. It's just, how have you felt about like vampire fantasy? Why are you the vampire expert? Why do you love it so much?
Oh, goodness. So, I mean, how can you not love vampires? They're sexy, they're weird, they just like exist for all time and just do whatever they want. You know, it's a fantasy of a carefree existence that's also full of drama and melodrama and stunts and shenanigans.
Tomfoolery.
Yes.
So where did this come from? So what was your first, you would say, vampire media that like you fell in love with?
I mean, gosh, the first one. I mean, before the Anne Rice of it all, the first thing that came to mind actually, do you remember the Scooby-Doo movie? What was it? The Ghoul School?
Yes, I love the Ghoul School.
And there was that fabulous little vampire girl. What was it? I don't even remember. It was like Rubella or something. And I'm like, yes, her. I see her.
In kids media especially, I have those memories. Like I was an Archie's comics kid and there's like the Sabrina stories. The sexy one, like the hot one, the one that was always like dressed, was always like the vampire girl. And I was like, yeah, I could see that. I used to watch Buffy with my mother growing up.
Mm-hmm.
That arises most prominently. So like I had Buffy as a background quite early on as like a bonding thing, but I never really liked Buffy that much. I mean, I liked Buffy. I liked it more when I watched it as an adult. But as a kid, I was just like, this is just something I'm spending time with my mom doing before Charmed comes on, which is the thing that I really wanted to watch.
Yes.
I've always been a witchy girl. That's me. I always like gravitated towards like the women who are like fucking shit up.
I don't believe in the glorification of murder. I do believe in the empowerment of women.
I think there's like a slight masculinity to vampire stories because they're like about masculine lust usually is what like I associate with them.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe because those are the most prominent examples that I had in my mind growing up. Boy stories, I just pushed aside as like something that like I had trouble connecting with. The first vampire that I really liked was more of a deconstruction of the vampire in Buffy. Yeah, I think I have a bit of a fractured relationship. What about like, is Anne Rice vampire like your stand-up? Is that like the vampire in your head, the one that you fell in love with, like you hold as an idol? Why is that?
So I started reading the Vampire Chronicles books in high school. I was a teenager. I was a voracious reader and I would just read any old thing. I must have started reading it because of the Queen of the Damned movie, even though I didn't like it. It's just Aaliyah slinking around, eating. Exactly, Aaliyah, period. That's it.
Period!
That also rises prominent in my head because I had this story how after Aaliyah passed, her brother came in and overdubbed some of her voice because it was such a close match that he could achieve it. So as you're watching that movie, she's an androgynous icon to me in a way.
Yes.
You know, I had that match. She's like a mix of everything, but also that look. That outfit.
Iconic.
Come on, the girls
Iconic.
are wearing it today. No, interrupted. Go on.
No, it's all good. Yeah, I was reading those books as a teenager, and they came at a really formative time for me as a queer teenager trying to figure things out. As a burgeoning pretentious writer, those books meant a lot to me. And because those books are so queer and opulent and very, they're it's funny, honestly, like the most masculine figure in those books is Lestat, who was always the least interesting person to me. I always preferred the background characters. Like Louis and Armand were the ones that meant the most to me.
Well, you've got some things to say to defend your King Armand today, I'm sure. No, but on that point, it is really interesting. Like Lestat was the star. He ended up emerging as the one with the most books, the ones with the most, and that was like the masculine strand. I mean, obviously that's what happens. What was it about those background characters that really captivated you?
Because those two in particular were the most sensitive and delicate, the most overtly queer. The books are so full of queer sexuality and queer eroticism, which is also why those books meant a lot to me, because they were, I could read them in plain sight and nobody would ask me what they were about. It's like, he's reading the Anne Rice books as vampires, and it's like, yes, but also everybody's gay.
Right. Yeah.
All I needed as a teenager, right? So Louis and Armand meant a lot to me as these sort of sensitive, delicate, masculine figures, right? A different kind of masculinity. And they were the ones who were interested in topics that I was interested in writing about, even as a very young writer. They would have these long conversations about art, beauty, and religion, and what does it mean to be alive, and what does it mean to have a companion. And it was a safe space for me, honestly. It was a space where I could exist and not panic.
I think that's something really powerful about what you're saying as well, about having something that you connected to, but that you could take outside. It's like a bit of a glass closet kind of thing. It's like, I'm holding it. I'm here. I identify with this, but you can't see it. You can't see what it is. Interesting how that happened with the book. When I think, as I was rewatching the movie, and then I was rewatching some episodes of the new series, the closet is related to the story, and reading back some of the things that Anne Rice was saying, how that seems to have happened unintentionally at the start as she was writing it, because this is something that I was writing about the places that she was living in and things that were inspiring her, and then seeing how the world morphed itself into relating to that story in a specific way, like people experienced it. Yeah, no, that's lovely. I was going back through your timeline, and I saw you make the statement that this is the show of the year. You got to stand behind. There's been a lot of heavy hitters this year. What do you think about this adaptation? Why do you love it so much?
It's incredibly written. It's incredibly acted from top to bottom. Main cast, the supporting cast are all firing on all cylinders. In addition to just being impeccably made, impeccably acted, it's fun, it's hilarious, it's sexy, it's queer. It's dramatic.
It's the book as well.
Finally, yes.
And they're using so much of her actual writing and dialogue. It's funny that I'm like speaking to a poet about this, because I found, as I was reading excerpts of the book, I was like, oh, yeah, a poet should be the person I speak to about this, because of the way that Anne Rice writes.
Yes.
Is that like something that you gravitated towards, the very philosophical nature of the work, which I know you talked about it a little bit. Do you mind talking about that a bit more? What is your view of like what Anne is doing with the word in that book?
It's interesting. I was thinking about my relationship to those books before coming on, and thinking about how it influenced my writing. And it's not so much her style of writing that I think influenced me and meant a great deal, so much as the characters themselves. Like the characters are the parts of the book that I ended up thinking the most about, because they were all interested in these big questions that I also am invested in. What does art mean? Does art console the spirit? What does religion mean if you are this monster that drinks people, who has to kill people to survive? Like, what does your relationship to God mean? They were having these really interesting conversations and thinking through these incredible topics, while at the same time eating a bunch of people, screwing each other over, having crazy gay sex. All that a girl could ask for, really.
From my field of study, I like looking at like life history and thinking of them as the way that they map out. Anne Rice's life history has also been really interesting, going from someone who was agnostic to Catholic to someone who identified as like a humanist Catholic. You were talking about the way that, so they are positioned as people who are like observers of life. I think that's how Anne Rice also described, right? And so it's kind of an excuse for her to just debate herself about what she thinks about existence and like have those sides sort of war against one another. Anyway, we've like, I think we dipped into slightly talking about what we think is the good adaptation, but you and I both sat down yesterday, I believe, and we endured what was the first attempt to bring this to screen. Should we start there?
Sure, because then we'll have nowhere to go but up.
I was a fresh-faced 1-year-old when this film came out to plague the earth. Oh, she's young.
She's so young, eternally youthful.
Supple. Starring Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Antonio Banderas, and Christian Slater in what I think is his most demented role and performance ever. So, okay, when did you first watch this film? Let's start there.
I mean, it must have been in my teens, I imagine, probably when I was reading the books for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
It's never really stuck around my memory. There are certain moments that have lasted for me, and we'll talk about it. But by and large, because it's such a bad adaptation, I never really think about it, except to be oh, this was an awful thing, and here's why. But yeah, it must have been when I was a teenager. This has actually been the first time I rewatched it in a couple of years. And rewatching it this time, I was just struck by how aggressively bad it is.
Yeah.
And not in a fun way. It's not even really fun bad. It's unenjoyable.
It's really odd because in my mind, before I sat down, in my head, it was oh, people think of this as a good film. This is a good 90s film that had an impact culturally. And watching it, it was if to be this is what we thought of was good and how far we have moved beyond that, thank goodness. But I do think that this film in particular probably launched a couple of decades of, I wouldn't say imitators, but of children.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It contributed a lot to the trope of the vampire in film or Western film media. On that point about its presentation of the trope, what was it going into trying to bring out? What do you think it was attempting?
I think it was attempting to make a movie, because I had read about the sort of production and the rigmarole of getting it. Yeah, and it was such a slog getting it made that and it feels like this is the safest version of this movie that we could make, which is really interesting, thinking about how in that moment it was perceived as this radical, dangerous, edgy thing. And it gave CW to be
Sniper!
it was giving Netflix original series. Where was the budget?
The budget went on Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt. That is where the budget went. And look, I get it, but God, it was so bad. It was a mess. It was like pantomime. It was like watching pantomime. Anyway, it's fine. I don't want to drag Tamisha too much. I feel like she's going through enough.
I mean, he knew what movie he was in. He was trying to have a good time.
Are you sure he knew which movie he was in? The way he was jumping around?
I mean, he had a vision and he committed to the bit. Meanwhile, they should have asked for the money back for Brad Pitt. What even is that brick of wood?
That version of Louis was not. That was really sad. It was really depressed. Maybe that was the impact to make me feel as depressed as he was meant to be feeling while watching that.
Well, mission accomplished.
But clap if you've ever wanted to kill somebody.
Who is Louis in this adaptation?
Mm-hmm.
All we know about him, he's depressed, he owns slaves, and he's depressed.
By the point of the production and the making of the film, the queer allusions were known and that were included in the story as it was developing from that point.
Mm-hmm.
They did willfully eliminate that from the script. And it was fascinating to just watch that happen, to see what happens to the story when you remove something that feels now so central for it. This is a story about power exchanging, it's a vampire story. And seeing what that does to the story, I thought was really interesting. It became kind of like a heterosexual, masculine, homoerotic, kind of sexual play. You know what I mean? But it's bros sleeping with the same woman is what it felt like. If we're thinking about this as a critique of the patriarchy and men in the patriarchy, then I think it does present something really fascinating.
I was thinking about the queerness and the absence of the queerness too in the movie. It had been a minute since I'd rewatched it, and they excised all the queerness from it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And rewatching it this time, I was struck by how it's weird. The movie, it felt like the movie at times wanted it both ways. There are so many moments where it's aggressively heterosexual. They're pursuing these women, they're drinking women's blood everywhere. There's that scene at the brothel where Tom Cruise is torturing that woman and puts her in the coffin, and it's you're a killer, Louis. And yet there are so many overt references to queerness in it. You know, there's a scene towards the end where Kirsten Dunst as Claudia is like, I know Armand wants you. I know you want Armand. Please make me this woman so I can be by myself and you can go have your boyfriend and like go be gay.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, wait, really? Like there are so many moments in the movie where there will be an explicit reference to, you guys are companions, you guys are together, you guys are, and yet the movie is so sexless. It's so unerotic. It's so staid.
I wonder if they allowed it with the character of Armand, who's being played by Antonio Banderas in this, as opposed to the character of Tom Cruise, because of like what we know about Tom Cruise now. And like how, I mean, like the perception is that he actively fights like anything that would be conceived as like queer. And despite that, I'm gonna edit that out. You gotta sue me, Tom. This mission is impossible.
Run all you can, honey.
You gonna catch me? Not me? Anyway, shout out to Leah Remini. But what we know about Tom Cruise, I wonder if that was the reason why they excised that so completely. But like they allowed that with like Armand, and I kept thinking like, oh, Antonio Banderas, like Almodovar films, you know, like he brings, especially in the 90s, like queerness is something I would associate with him so much. So I wonder if like they thought that would offset it, to fill that niche. The gays would like this, but we can't have Tom Cruise be gay. But on that point, I kept also thinking about the things that we were bringing into it, because from what we know about Brad Pitt and the stuff that's been out in the tabloids about him and his family recently, like he became more of the Lestat in my head going into it. Lestat in real life, while Tom Cruise is Louis, the messy gay. Genuinely, we see people who are, to me, are miscast in this moment. What do you think about the things that we brought into it?
I mean, the casting makes so much sense, right?
They're superstars.
Exactly. It's like, it's the early 90s. We're making a vampire movie. You cast the two hottest guys to be the two male leads. And it's like, oh, we need like this European. Who's a sexy European? You get Antonio Banderas, right? You know, you slot him into like European, little queer, but the characters are just so empty. Like, who is Armand? You know, Antonio Banderas shows up. He's like, hey, I'm Armand. And then he just says, I'm Armand all the time. You know,
Armand is a bad bitch with a 22-inch weave. Rican, Puerto Rican.
She wishes.
She walked out there looking like Naomi Smalls.
Life's not fair.
I
Naomi
see you.
Smalls. Please. Looking like pork chop. What is that synthetic wig? The Theater of Vampires looks like Party City. What are we doing? I'm glad he burned it down. It was all plastic anyway.
What is this, honey?
How did he burn it down? It was all plastic and sawdust. It was sad. It was sad. It was embarrassing.
It was nothing.
You know, that was a good scene. I will give them the setting fire to the place was a good scene, which is why I think that the second season of Interview with the Vampire, I think they homaged it a little bit with like the way that they shot that.
Yes.
It took like the one good thing about that film, aside from Kirsten Dunst, who, let's take a second for the Claudia of this.
Incredible, amazing, show-stopping, spectacular, never the same, totally unique. That little girl ate up all the scenery, left no crumbs. Incredible. Honestly, like to me, like I was really struck by how she really felt like the center of the movie. Like I felt like so much of the emotional energy, so much of the compassion and the investment is in that character. You know, the horror of being literally a like 5-6-year-old forever, and then you're stuck living with these two assholes. Like, kill me now, put me in the sun. I've had it. What a fate to be stuck with those two drama queens for the rest of your life.
She's like, maybe I am Republican. Shit.
Maybe gays don't deserve rights.
Bring back Prop 8. Come on. I want to ask and I want you to tell. That's what I want. I mean, she looks like she stepped right out of Birth of a Nation.
She is a little Southern white girl.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about race.
Race?
Because race is in the story. It does play out, I think, in that first version of the film. And that has been the topic of the conversation, the way that they will change the race and include it in the story of the adaptation. What is the show doing, or what is the movie doing with race, in your opinion?
I don't think the movie itself has a clear idea of race beyond the most basic kinds of things. Something I was struck by was the scenes earlier in the movie where like Louis is still on the plantation or whatever, and his slaves figure out out that he's a vampire. And there are like those
Yeah.
brief moments where it's just shots of Black people around a fire and just like dancing and screaming. And it's like that is to me like what the film thinks about race is like, oh, it's like here's like the slaves, right? It felt like
Blackness as a mass. Blackness as not really having much of an identity.
Exactly.
On my notes, blackness exists. First sight of it was a Black sex worker being killed by both of them, or was it by one of them? So it was to serve that story and to show us how Louis' character was beginning to empathize with humans and was still like in touch with humanity. So victimhood. And then we had Thandiwe Newton pop up in Mary Laveau drag, I want to say. It was...
Yeah. There was a lot happening there.
There was so much happening. So much happening. Wow. Yeah, it was real Creole Lady Marmalade. It was like a lot. It was... But yeah, she showed up as a servant and then she died. She showed up also as like the voice of the enslaved population that Louis owns by.
Sure does.
It's so detached from the actual realities and horrors of the things that it's implying just by like presenting this person. And I think you could say there's something interesting happening there with how like it's asking us to like empathize with monsters. A fictional monster also be someone who is monstrous in real life. Okay, yeah, I see that if they did that, but they didn't actually like delve into that as a topic. If they did that, I think that would have been an interesting movie that makes us think about how like, oh, you found your humanity when you became a monster, when in real life you were just as much of a monster. But you know, instead, we kept the Black people in the background to serve the white narrative again and again. I mean, these aren't new critiques, though, are they?
You know, to add to that point, there's such a lack of specificity about place in the movie, which is wild. You know, you have a movie set in New Orleans, and it just looks like any other old-timey city. It felt like the movie didn't have a sense of what is specific about New Orleans, about that location. You know, I was really taken by the lack of investment, which I think connects to that, how the movie had nothing really interesting or novel to say about race outside of standard awful old tropes, right?
This was like 1994 came out, so I'm not good at timelines. I don't remember which president that was in America. Either Clinton or Bush. Either way, it was shit for race.
Yes. It was not great.
And listener, it continues to be globally. Yay.
Well... God.
I guess we're at a moment now where we're actually talking about race in interesting ways, or more interesting ways in media. I guess this serves to show us how race was being treated, how Blackness in stories that should have a lot of Blackness in them were being treated. And like you said, like without specificity, without any true interests, it casts a shadow on the film for me. Whatever like bright spots I want to give to it. So like I find myself really like trending negative on it, but it does present interesting dynamics. The other thing I wanted to hit about, if we could jump to Tom Cruise, who is insane in this film. Like he what do you think about what Tom Cruise is doing in this film? Like give me your review, please.
It's great drag. It's really, really good drag. He's running around like he's a Looney Tune. You know, he plays Lestat like this weird gremlin who just shows up out of nowhere. And he's like, hey, girl, I'm kind of into you. I'm going to make you a vampire. Let's have fun.
Don't come to my house or else I'll suck your dick. Blood. I'll suck your blood. Oh, shit.
And Louis was like, I will not be matching your freak. No, never.
Exactly. And that's where the movie fails immediately. Interview with the Vampire is somebody going to match my freak? And Brad Pitt said no, and then the movie was a flop. But no, I thought that Tom Cruise had a point of view with the character. He was just all in with it in a way that I appreciated. He really tapped into, I think, the sort of bizarre monstrousness of being a vampire.
He was having fun with it. And I appreciate that. Especially when like you're standing next to Brad Pitt, who seems like he does not want to be there in any of his scenes. So yeah, we were talking earlier about like the heterosexuality aspect of it, and like the idea of like the stuff that we're bringing in to it today. And I associate Tom Cruise with the theme of crisis of masculinity, like in all his work. Like I saw a picture of him the other day, like hanging from a helicopter, and so viewing the film through that, it was like watching someone who is really like a sister, a queen, really like not accepting like really like refusing to just like just suck a dick, and then like forcing her good Judy to be the same way, you know, like that. It had that energy about it. I was like, oh wow, this is like fucking demented. It just really dislodges the story, makes it more of like I want to sit there and critique it in relation to the narrative, the celebrity narratives of both of them, and like their cultural narratives rather than actually like what the film is doing. But I mean, what can we expect from a film that's like Geffen production? Speaking of sinister gays, I'm coming for all the girls today. I just want sue me. Sue me. We're talking about race, we're talking about masculinity, and all the ways in that intersects in this film. I think the epitome is when Louis was standing next to Claudia looking at New Orleans on fire and being like, we're going to go back to Paris now. I'm sorry,
Yes.
Black people. I'll be back in 100 years. This is what I will show to someone if they want to know what I feel about
And now, white flight.
this is a story about gentrification going wrong. All right, so tell me about the TV show. Were you like day one?
I was, yes. I was in from the jump.
And were you as happy from day one as you are today?
Love it even more. I had been following it along for a while. Like I'd heard that it had been in production. I was following the news, and I remember hearing that they were going to make Louis Black. And I remember hearing the news, and I'm like, oh no. I was like, I was terrified because at the time I didn't know that they were going to like bump up the timeline a bit, and so I thought that it was still going to be in like the 19th century. And I'm like, oh no, like this already sounds like a disaster, right? And so like I remember hearing that news and coming into the show a bit nervous, but after watching that first episode, I was hooked. I knew that the show was in good hands. I thought that making Louis Black, I thought making Claudia Black really
added to the narrative.
It did. It added to the narrative as well as preserved so much about what makes those characters specific and beloved. It's incredible from top to bottom. I was queening out from the moment that I saw it. I was screaming. As soon as they started making out and floating in the air, I was like, this is the interview that I came for. This is all that I wanted. Let's keep it going.
So we just spent like half an hour talking about the movie and the ways that not only just failed as a film, but the way that it also failed as an adaptation. So how do you feel about this as an adaptation of those books that you were reading growing up and that you fell in love with?
It does the thing that I think that all adaptations should aspire towards, by which I mean it understands what the source material is, and it also understands that television is a different medium. And so it enacts changes to make the source material make the most sense in this new one. And so I thought that those changes, it spoke to an investment in the source material. It spoke to an understanding of the source material. And it also spoke to understanding an audience that was hungry for this kind of queer representation. It spoke to an audience that could think about race, that could talk about race, that could invest in these questions, right? I applaud that ambition, you know, and I think that the show really holds no punches in that regard, particularly about race. You know, I remember I would see people talk about how people voice complaints about how they thought that race wasn't handled well enough, or that it wasn't, you know, that it could have been done better. And like, of course, like things can always be done better. But I think that by and large, from the moment that the show started, it foregrounds Blackness, and it foregrounds, you know, the specific way that Claudia and Louis have to move through the world. That's different than the way that Lestat has to. That's different from the way that Armand has to. Yeah.
Just on that point about adaptation and the inclusion of Blackness, I felt the same way when I realized, oh, they've made Louis Black. I was like, okay, I don't know. Like, I remember bits of the story. I didn't know how I would feel about that because, like, you know, fuck Hamilton. Race blind casting has ruined good storytelling a lot of the time, you know? Whereas, like, I think it ruined good adaptation. They haven't made it part of the story. They were interested in actually adapting and seeing, like, oh, this is a new medium. How would this shift the storyline? And it has added to it a lot. So on the point of race. What you were saying about like its representations of race is that there's an investment in the actual story. I think what really hit me watching that first episode again is that this is a complex representation of Blackness. Like you were saying also earlier about how in the movie New Orleans was there, but it didn't feel like New Orleans. It didn't feel like something that is based and steeped in that culture and in the stories of those people. While this one actually uses the setting, and it matters matters that not only is Louis black, but he's also Creole and he's also light skinned, and he's in New Orleans at a specific time where that meant specific privileges that are afforded to him. The way that race is actually implemented in the storytelling, it's important. It's important to how the story is going to develop from then to the modern day. Narrow in on that point where it's like I was talking about, Louis is not only black, he's a light skinned black man in the story. How does that affect Navigate? You see how he's been moving towards a story that is very familiar. How has that shifted it for you?
There's that aspect to it, of course, and a thing that I was thinking about was how Louis seems to have come up from money. Like that he seems to have come from like a pretty well-off background, which is different, even though like the family seems to have like fallen on hard times since he's working as a pimp essentially. He comes from money, he comes from this privileged background. And there's a way, while he's still a human being, right, where that butts up against so much of the politics and infrastructure of early 20th century New Orleans, dealing with those white government officials, those white businessmen, right? There's only so far that Louis can go. After he's turned into a vampire, I feel like so much of that first season, or like good part of it, is him figuring out like, okay, I am a black queer man in this context, and now I like live forever and can do whatever I want, right? There's that moment where he like kills that one guy who talked crazy at him, right? And like that felt real, right? Like that felt real, It's like, of course, like you're a black immortal vampire now. Of course you're gonna like fuck up some white people, duh. Like that felt like a real natural progression, right? As did something I really loved about Louis in the second season. He's sort of like this pretentious, he wants to be a photographer and he wants to like hang out with these artists. Like he felt very much like that kind of, felt like cool, hip, alternative black people that I know, right? It's like, I want to be, pretentious and like live this sort of like woo, modernist lifestyle in Paris. And it also like touches on that historical moment, right, where we have like all those mid-century black artists going to Paris because it's better, quote unquote, than the US, right? And like that's another element of the show that I really appreciate too, is that like it alludes to that real history of black artists and intellectuals in Paris, but it doesn't make an after-school special of it. It puts it on the table, and it has enough faith in the audience to recognize that, and then they keep it pushing. So much of the way that Louis and Claudia move in Paris is really interesting. I would read tweets of people being like, why are they, in Europe and nobody's hassling them and being racist? And it's like, race is different in different contexts and in different times. So like, it's not going to be the same as in the US. And yet there is still so much racist bullshit that they deal with. It's just of a different flavor. I think a lot about how like the theater troupe treats them, and the way that like when they first meet them, one of them is like, oh, they're so hot. Like there's a way that they're objectified in a very particular way that isn't made explicit farther than that. And yet it's there. So much of that is there too. Like the way they treat Claudia as like this awful little servant, even though it's like, it's hazing, it's tradition. It's like, sure, but it's also, you're being awful to this black.
Yeah, from like what you're saying, like it's drawing me to think of like, I wonder if we should expand this idea of how we're discussing race in the show, of like not just being about like the way that race is forcing the characters to move, but I think it's connected to a bigger theme, maybe of privilege. I kept thinking about that a lot as I was watching it, is that everybody has afforded almost this cachet of privilege that they're using to wield. So you start with Louis, who was a pimp in New Orleans. Like we're talking about all the other things that afforded him privilege, but then he was still limited, like you were saying. He was sitting at that pool table being talked over and being reminded of this is as far as you go and this is how much you get. But then you see a character like Lestat pop in, who is the epitome of like representations of privilege. He's white, he is super alabaster white, he has money. You see Louis, who has status, not wealth, but like he's still curtailed. The first season, Louis's brother Paul, his closeness to the church and the way that the church suggested to me as like affording protection and as a way for him to like as a means to power, and the way that's also like draped across his family as well. I think that's sort of not isolating, but like as one of the barriers. Claudia, as like when she comes in as a young girl trapped, even though she's a being of such immense power, her shell traps her from exposing it or actually accessing it. Moving into the second season, like when they go to Paris, what you were talking about, that I think is like, oh, how their power is moving differently in a different location. where they're allowed to
Mhm.
express more of it. And I think it's also notable that Armand is also non-white.
Mhm.
And that refracts in the story, especially because we see towards the end of the season that Lestat has a relationship with him as well, had a relationship with him. And I think that positions Lestat in an interesting way of this idea of like as the white daddy, if we're thinking about that like in terms of queer relationships.
This primitive country has spit you clean. It has shackled you in permanent exile. Every room you enter, every hat you're forced to wear, the stern landlord, the deferential businessman, the loyal son, all these roles you conform to, and none of them your true nature. What rage you must feel as you choke in your sorrow. I can swap this life of shame. Swap it out for a dark gift and a power you can't begin to imagine. You just have to ask me for it. You just have to nod your beautiful head and say yes.
Right? And I just kept thinking about this show as like watching the toxicity that can exist within romantic companionship pairings. Race as being another kind of weapon that is wielded.
In Louis and Armand's relationship as non-black figures in this really white space, and how tenuous the privileges that both of them have are,
Yeah.
right? You know, Armand is the leader of the coven, right? And yet there's just like this palpable sense from the troop that they're just doing it because he's the oldest. Like it seems like they don't have much respect for him, which I think is in part because he is not white, right?
Coded that way, yeah, it comes across that way.
It's so funny. I was just thinking about the white daddy of it all.
Yeah.
And yeah, and just like that the gif that goes around of like Louis putting colors only on the door, and then he's like, I'm gonna go back to my white house.
I mean, that is part of the narrative. We had Louis' sister talk about him being the daddy. Like, I don't want any money from your daddy, right?
Yes.
And in her perception, that was because of something else. But, he is his daddy. We have this dynamics. And I think in season 2, what really becomes interesting for me is the way that Louis takes on that role. Louis becomes the daddy for Armand, I think.
Mm-hmm.
There it is. Half blank, half apocalyptic look. But what does it mean tonight? Huh? Does he want to lick my boots or chop my hands off? Is it the gremlin or the good nurse tonight? Huh?
Almost like he's in drag, right? He's in Lestat drag a lot of the time. Like that scene when he was like, "Oh, you can read me your poem face down in the coffin."
Yes,
like
exactly.
That's Lestat.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of it seems like he's trying to navigate existing as a vampire with his only role model is this white demon, and as a queer person. In this society, I found that to be a really interesting parallel.
Yes, very much so.
Talk about it.
I mean, the spirit of Tamara is strong in good old Louis. Unfortunately.
No!
I love him, but it has to be said. My poor Louis, bless his heart. But yeah, your point about like Lestat being the only sort of figure that Louis and Armand in a sense have as how to be a vampire, how to be queer. And both of them, are obviously obsessed with Lestat in like different ways, of course. But their ideas of vampirism, of queerness, of masculinity, of sex are all sort of refracted around this idea of like who Lestat is, of course. And like,
yes.
So like the literal story of this season is like Louis trying to remember, like it's about memory too. And we don't ever see Lestat in person really until the end. It's all just like people saying like, this is what Lestat did. This is who I thought Lestat was. Even whiteness as an unavoidable center that that everybody kind of has to deal with.
It's a story about like black people dealing with that center.
Yeah, exactly.
Claudia yelling, it's always him. It's always you and him. It's never me.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, that is so powerful. I just kept thinking about it. Like all of y'all talking about Charlie XCX's brat, but none of you talking about Megan. I see you, white gays. It's always her. It's always her. You're showing up in London saying free Tory? Fuck people. Sorry, I'm really angry.
Get them.
They don't deserve me. They don't deserve my time. But no, it's like the white daddy. Also, I think age is a really important factor in this. The idea of Lestat is much older and Louis is his like twink. And that power dynamic is obviously like mapped on to there. And I think that is something that happens in queer culture quite a bit.
Yeah, yes. There's a long history of within queer relationships, older men having younger partners. And like oftentimes when younger people who are like, exploring their queerness, like often they will have these older male figures to show them the ropes, more or less. Here is an introduction to queer life. That, too, is a part of Lestat's role as like this older, daddy figure for Louis, right? Lestat is like, here's how I move through the world as this
Right.
queer white man, right? And he teaches this to Louis. Part of Louis's journey is seeing the limitations of the way that Lestat moves through the world, both in a literal sense, like there are things that Louis cannot do, but also there are things that just are not good for Louis. Like there are things that he just does not want to do because they're not good for him personally.
So is this a story about queer mentorship?
Yeah, mentorship and community, right? Like the first episode of the second season is Louis and Claudia trying to find other vampires, right? They're trying to find their tribe. But yeah, like part of it is this searching out of not just, romantic companion. Like it really is a wonderful exploration of like queer life, right? Trying to find romantic companionship, trying to find your chosen family, trying to find your people, trying to find others like you, trying to find your history. Where do vampires come from? Like who are the other vampires? How did we get here? That recovery of queer history, of vampiric history, of Black history, right, is all sort of woven into the second season.
Also, the like attempt to make something good of it. You know, despite all the monstrousness and the brutality and the blood in history that brought us to this moment, trying to like use this moment to create something good despite being monstrous. And maybe this like betrays my view of myself as like a selfish, horrible human being, but who's trying to do good, right? Who's trying to wake up every day saying, I did something okay. I think there is something like really beautiful about watching that journey take place and like being able to like experience that with them. I think that's also partly why I resisted the show so much. Something about it really forces you to sit down and reflect. I'd say because a lot of it is about like what's the point of being alive is what the conversations are about. So you really like sit there and be like, okay, what is the purpose existing in like such a torturous position? Just these characters in particular are really tremendous examples of the idea of like the beauty of being an observer, the tragedy of it, the tragedy of just like witnessing and experiencing and surviving and trying to like, survive with someone else. There's a lot of beauty in the show, I guess is my point.
Yeah, exactly. There's beauty in it and strife and drama, like thinking about the community aspect of the show again, like something that I appreciated alongside the positiveness of trying to find oneself and one's community. I love that the show didn't shy away from intra-community drama. The way that Louis and Claudia in particular would butt heads throughout the season, throughout the whole show really, were really moving to me. The way that Claudia, as this young Black female character, right, is having to deal with the limitations of this Black man who she's stuck living with.
He hasn't betrayed our trust or told our
Don't be
secret.
chasing it, except he just threatened me with it.
Oh, it doesn't sound like him.
Doesn't sound like him. I forgot. Love makes you stupid, makes you fickle and weak and blind. Let me guess, he's your companion finally. Well, good for fucking you. You and him and you and fucking him. Picked another one over me.
You picked the COVID! You left me! Go sit in the choice.
It's another one over me. Every single time, every single place that we go, like you choose some other guy over me, right? You keep leaving me bereft. And, that's partially why it's partially why they meet their awful fates, right? Is that like Claudia is essentially by herself. She's the most vulnerable person in the narrative in a lot of ways. And so much of the show is about how these communities have failed her as like the lone Black female figure in the show, right?
You hit this point earlier about Claudia specifically being a Black character, a young Black girl, young woman, I think, in the show, because they've aged her up. But I think there's something like really profound, I guess, about the way that her limitations are in her body. Her body limits her from existing in the way that she wants to, which I think, if we're thinking about that in relation to the way that Black women are treated day to day in society, I think that maps on in like interesting way. Not to say that there are limitations on the Black women, but the limitations society imposes on Black women is like what I think I'm gesturing towards and literalizing that. and a young girl, I think adds a different layer of like tragedy, the tragedy that society has like cursed Black women simply for existing, you know?
Mhm.
I think, yeah, Claudia, I don't think we've really talked enough about her role, but I think it adds, if we're going to talk about how like she intersects with Lestat and Louis, it adds such dimension to it, because like you were saying, it is really powerful when they fight. And it is really, I feel it. I really, really feel it when
Mhm.
Claudia is in that room fighting with Lestat or Louis or them both. It moves the narrative from just being about the toxicity of Louis and Lestat's relationship as a coupling, and the idea of like a toxicity of a family, how that interplays.
Mhm.
Because, you know, from my perspective, Louis is as much to blame for what happens and what Claudia experienced right up until the moments of her death. He didn't protect
Mhm.
her. He didn't really like answer her needs, despite the fact that she's a monster. You know, he didn't care for her needs. He prioritized his always. You're thinking of the idea of Louis as being the most humane character, the most human character. He's the most selfish one, really, if we're
Mhm.
going to talk about that.
They're all just sort of monstrously selfish, aren't they? Like they're all
Mm-hmm.
just out for themselves. And there's a way that Claudia is in some sense, like she's as monstrous as everyone else, but there's a sense that she understands that about herself and she stands in that. Like Claudia's not
Mm-hmm.
gonna like bullshit around and be like, what was me, idiot? And this is what I am, and I'm trying to make
Mm-hmm.
the best out of this awful situation.
She's not allowed to. She's not allowed
Exactly.
to.
She's not, and she's just trying to over and over. You know, the scene in the trial where we get that flashback to when Claudia was made, but from Lestat's perspective, is that shot where Louis is dragging her almost dead body behind him like a doll. That's the
Mm-hmm.
relationship right there, right? She is just this thing that he keeps dragging behind him for his man, right? And it's so moving that, because I was trying to think like who, like, are there any quote unquote like good people, like who's like the good people in this? And I was thinking about Madeline, Claudia's would-be boo, the scene at
Right.
the trial where they
Was
offer
she
her
a
like
Nazi sympathizer?
no, I think Madeline, as I understand it,
Expose yourself. All right, I see you. I see you, Derrick.
well, I thought Madeline was Jewish, is like the implication, right? Like Madeline is like
Was
this
it?
Jewish, yeah, because those Nazis kept putting swastikas on her store, and I
In my mind, it was that she slept with a Nazi soldier.
oh yeah, I mean, I think that that's there too. Like she did it to survive, but like I don't think that,
Oh. Oh,
no,
I didn't
no.
realize that. Okay, rescinded.
Yeah, yeah, she's fine. There's that moment in the trial where they're like, Madeline, you can like join the coven or you're gonna die. And she's like,
Mhm.
no, Claudia is my coven. And I feel like that moment where she's like, Claudia is my coven is perhaps like the only unselfish thing that a vampire does in the whole thing. You know, she's like,
Mm.
this is my person, you know, I'm gonna stick with her, right? Like that feels to me like the most, in a show that's so much about betrayal and misunderstanding and nastiness, right? Like that felt like a moment of earnestness in that season, right? Like that felt like two vampires seeing each other.
I might push back on the point just that that might be the like most unselfish thing we've seen one of them do. The reason why I find Lestat compelling is because I feel like he can only be unselfish to Louis.
Mm-hmm.
Like Louis is the only person he kind of sees. And I find that to be almost like the thing about their relationship. He fights against Louis when Louis kind of rejects that aspect of him,
Mm-hmm.
which he sees as their commonality. So that's the only thing I would push back against. Not that I disagree with you,
Yeah.
because I think selfishness is like the inherent quality of Lestat. Anyway, but no, it's on Madeline. I mean, God, that second. So I'm just thinking of like that run from the Theater of the Vampires to like the end. It was just like fantastic. Santiago,
Applause. Applause. Woo!
Santiago.
A
Like, come
demon.
on.
A
Ah,
demon. Ooh.
a demon. And I loved how they got him off the board. Like it was like whatever that they threw it away. I thought that was fantastic. The show is really clever. Yeah.
Goodness gracious. Iconic.
I kind of want to hit that point about the toxicity of the relationship a bit more. So you were talking about communities earlier. Just to take a different angle on it, how do you feel about the fan community that has sprung up around the show?
Oh, I mean, from what I observe in my little perch on
Mhm.
Twitter, I mean, it seems like it's a rabid fan base that has sprung up around it,
Yeah.
which is really heartening to like see this much love for this
Mhm.
wild show about Black queer vampire people, right? that is like dealing with, you know, what does it mean to be alive? Like, how do I survive all of this? So, you know, it's kind of heartening to see that kind of love and support. I mean, I'm gonna be honest, like I try to avoid that kind of stuff. I mean, like, are there things that you've noticed in particular about like the way that the community has moved around the show?
I mean, it's exactly the point that you were making about like the rabidness of the fan base. It's a very dedicated fan base.
Yeah.
It reminds me a lot of the Sherlock fan base, if you remember, and like the Tumblr, a lot of fan art coming up of the romanticized pairing. I mean, I love it. I think the show was fantastic, and I think that fan base forming is great because it means that the show will probably keep coming back. My thing about it is that it's just, I find Louis and Lestat to be a very toxic relationship, right?
Oh, yes.
And I think well, yes. But okay, no, I also find Lestat and Louis and Armand to be a super toxic relationship. And so whenever I see people ship them, I always just like, oh, why are you doing that? I'm scared. I hope that you're not, because because a lot of them are also like young fans, and I find like, oh, I just really hope that is not what is in your mind as you grow up. But I think we've all been there.
Oh yeah, I mean, like I think that's part of the magic of fandom, right? Is like using these characters to help articulate things within yourself, right? Where it's like, you know, hopefully folks know that these are like not ideals, these are not models, these are not real people. But you know, like take what you can from these characters and to sort of like build things within yourself, because they are like awful. They are awful. You know, Louis and Lestat are terrible. It's hot, but they're awful. Louis and Armand, bless their heart. Like, I love their production of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, but they were never like, baby, it was never gonna work. Like, Armand wanted a top so bad.
Clothes off, face down in the coffin.
And like, it was doomed. It's like, baby, he can't do that for you. I'm sorry, my
love.
love.
Has walked into a room. It's just not
he is fine. He is fine as all get out.
They didn't have Amazon back in the day. They didn't have Love Honey. They had nothing. All they had was a wooden stake, and that leaves splinters. It was rough. Okay.
Yeah. Mama couldn't hop onto Jacked and see what was happening in Paris. I've been stuck in a sewer for 500 years, and here comes this fine man.
And you know, Louis would have been a Sniffies queen. You can just see it. You know I'm right. Yes. I think Lestat would. He's a white Republican. He's gonna be like a headless torso at the Republican convention on Grindr. He's not gonna go on Sniffies. I think Louis cruises. I see her.
He was in those parks in Paris all the time. That's all Mama was doing before she shacked up with Armand.
And good for her.
Yes. Get the trade. Get them all.
No, but on your point about the fan getting from a story what you need to link back to an earlier point we were talking about the way that the closeted narratives can really map on to the story. If you're thinking about the way that, I mean, obviously it's about vampires existing in public and hiding from everyone, and this is a story about repressed desire. We can also look at the fan reaction and the community that's gravitated towards the show being young girls and young queer people. I think that's good. It's good that they have something that they can see themselves in. And it makes sense that a story about repressed desire and repressed power is something that someone of that demographic would be relating to. Mm-hmm. I mean, for me, anxiety aside, the story ends up in a place that I don't think suggests something toxic is what you need in your life. I hope that they just managed to actually tell that story well. So let's take a point about Armand. So can you tell me, what do you think about Armand this season, who is played by Assad Zaman, showed up as Rashid in season 1, and then really like this was the season that I think really he stepped out. I hope he gets an Emmy or something, because I think he's the role that I'll be thinking about. Armand this season.
Incredible. He's just amazing. And like it meant a lot to me in particular because Armand was one of the characters in the books that I really loved. And to see this portrayal after Antonio Banderas' Party City wig, I was like, finally Armand exists. Assad Zaman so beautifully captures those really extreme contradictions about Armand, where on the one hand, he is deeply controlling and deeply insidious and is also a doormat. He's a complete doormat.
Yeah.
Like one moment he's
sneaky.
Exactly. He's like,
He's sneaky about his power.
Talk about power for a second. Like, he wields it. It's a completely different example of how to wield power, right? Like, Lestat just runs through the world, and it's his oyster, right? Whereas Armand is a figure so beholden to tradition. There's all this sort of like the vampire laws, and I'm the coven leader, and all of that. Like, he's a figure who
trusts the system.
He trusts the system. He's trapped within the system. He's trying to make the most out of a system that has harmed him from the jump, and is trying to get out. And he is a figure who kind of they all kind of replicate harm in different ways. But this season, I think, makes explicit the ways that Armand in particular repeats harms, the way that he alters memories, the way that he omits truths, the way that he's sneaky. And yet, like, despite all of his monstrousness, I have such a soft spot for that character. There is, like, at his core, like, there's a figure who's just fragile and who really just needs support, and who is just trying to find love and find understanding and find stability. I feel like so much of Armand's monstrousness comes from a place of just wanting stability. He's trying to, like, fix him and Louis' relationship in Amber. Like, just in so many ways, he just wants it to be the same and unchanging. You can't do that. You can't do that to a human being, and you can't do that to a century-old vampire, apparently.
I absolutely love your point about Armand wanting to fix that relationship in Amber. He wants things to stay the same. And a lot of the show is also about, like, the way that things will change. And these are people who are so resistant to change. Yeah, I mean, God, and that, like, marriage story scene between him and Louis.
Baby. Oh my God.
We got one thing about this show. All right, one thing about the show is that these people are acting. These people are here. They were like, we were trained. We went to school for this, okay?
This is theater, baby.
We're all British. We're pretending to be American. Come on, let's go. Hard consonants, always.
Shout out to the actress who played Claudia in the first season. I don't think we talked about, like, the actress switch between the seasons.
Bailey Bass.
Also phenomenal as Claudia. Like, I thought that
fantastic.
They both brought, like, different energies that made a lot of sense for where the character was at in both of those seasons.
What do you think the different performances gave in season 1 as opposed to season 2?
I feel like in the first season, I feel like Bailey really captured the kind of the childishness of Claudia, like the sense of, like, if you imagine, like, what a child who is suddenly, like, this immortal superpowered being would do. It would run wild, right? There's, like, a prickliness, there's a feistiness, there's a hunger that felt really real and felt like emerging out of something that was new and being discovered, right?
Right.
Whereas Delaney in this season, I felt really captured that exhaustion, just, like, being tired of the bullshit.
Puberty. She was, like, in puberty, like, with her energy.
Very that, and also just, like, at this point, it's been, like, several decades, right? So she's, like, a middle-aged woman still in this teenage body, and so she's just, like, that kind of energy you sense in that performance, right? It really felt like somebody who had been through some stuff for a while, and it's just like,
there was no joy in it. There's like no real joy in Bailey. I think in the first season was fantastic as. I was a bit apprehensive when they changed the casting, but then I like within a couple of episodes I was like, okay, no, I'm all in, because that actress, I've never seen her in anything before. Delaney is fantastic. I'm really excited for every single actor in the show, because it's also one of those things, I think, when you sit down and you're like, oh, everybody is going to be so famous after this. I hope they're going to, like, end up everywhere. I hope they're successful. And they, not even just that, I hope they continue getting good stories to act. Like Jacob Anderson, who plays Louis in this. We know him as Grey Worm in, like, Game of Thrones. This is who he was. This is what he was capable of the whole time.
Right?
Good God. That fucking show did nothing with you. What a waste.
I swear, give him everything. Give that man everything. He's just, what a talent. What a talent.
Yes. Final point, which I don't think we really talked about much, but I just had a note written down about, like, the idea of, like, the vampire comes from the idea of, like, lordship sucking, like, blood from the commoners and, like, taking from them. And I think we've talked a lot about power and power dynamics. And I just wanted to, like, leave us maybe with that idea, maybe, like, approaching next season to think about how, like, they continue shifting that, especially now that Lestat's about to be a rock star.
Sure is.
All right, Derrick, I'm going to ask you a series of rapid fire questions. Please answer them with a small paragraph.
Okay.
Let's start with question number 1. I want you to tell me, who do you think is the winner of book 1? And we are including the movie and the 2 seasons of the show.
The winner is the audience for finally getting a good adaptation. We won. We are the victors. We have had a feast. But, you know, besides that, I really think it's like Louis. Like he's the knight. He's the king.
She's the moment.
She's everything.
She's an icon. She's a legend. Now come on now.
She's just out of a relationship. She's feeling flirty. She's feeling young. She doesn't give a damn anymore.
She got some color in her wardrobe. Yes. Oh god. I think from my end, I'm going to give the winner of book 1 to Armand. From the tragedy of Antonio Banderas' representation, though, I personally will maintain that the hair was hairing, that the locks were locking, that she was giving Naomi on that little Parisian run walk. She said, yes. She's giving you Vogue. She's giving you House of Miyake Mugler. Come on now, represent. So I'm gonna give it from that. I think okay. You know what? I'm gonna give that wig a win, but I'm also gonna give the win to Assad. Just I think also because I wasn't sure how that was going to go with the reveal of the finale of the first season, because I was just like, oh, okay, work. Well, what now? But then, like, I was like, yeah, no, she made me eat my words, you know, like, fantastic, and also like seeing a sister, you know, I was like, oh, she's doing it. I was like, I'm just proud as well. I really hope that this show gets some award recognition, gets something. Even though that is not what matters, but just in terms of getting more eyes on it, and like it deserves that as well. Especially like looking at the Emmy nomination that just came out, which were depressing as always.
For real. Oof.
Let me know. Does the bear need that much? Does it?
Right, didn't we? We gave her a lot last time. She's fine. They don't need anything.
She's on a billboard. She's on a Calvin Klein. She's fine. Enough. So I'll give it to Armand. Armand, come get your 10s. But now you, Derrick, could you please give me your loser of book 1?
Oh, the loser. You know?
It's gonna get messy. That you know, I know. The psychic sphere is disturbed.
Actually, you know, it's not actually that messy. I was gonna say Daniel, who we haven't really talked about.
Oh, that old bitch.
Yeah, that old queen is sort of like the loser. I mean, she was fantastic. She was great, but now she is entangled with these weirdos for the rest of her life. And it's like, is this really what you wanted, sir? Like, you just came here to get a Pulitzer Prize and like get, you know, a cute little advance, and now you are stuck in gay drama for the rest of your life.
And not only that, but like globally, the world thinks you're a flop who's lost his wits and who is now writing vampire fanfiction and calling it real life. Like, girl, embarrassing. You started off the season. You were giving master classes. You were living your life. You could have just like slapped a fiction on it and got on a bestseller. What's wrong with you?
Right. And now you're here. Now you're here in this insanity for the rest of your life.
You're far from the shallow now.
And like the gag of all of this happening because he went to a bar one night to get some drugs. All of this happened because he wanted to get high one night. He just wanted to get high one night. Now look at him. So no, I completely agree with you. Yeah, no, the flop of the season, Daniel Malloy, bless his heart. You tried. A lot of reasons to declare him a flop, but I think the one that I will stand behind is the fact that you became a vampire, but you're like 86. Right. And I just think that's sad. Like right now, I wouldn't want to be a vampire. Like my back hurts. I'm not that old. My back hurts. My leg hurts. I have a headache every single morning. I don't want to keep this. I would become a vampire at like 15. And that's it. I need like a schedule. Like I need time to get snatched. I need time to like get this into shape. Because if I'm gonna last forever, baby, I'm gonna be hot. So like I need advance. I need a timeline.
I will have real reservations because I'd be like, do I want people to think I'm wearing colored contacts all the time?
Like, can I keep my eyes? Like, I don't want the Coco Montreses. Like, I don't need that.
But yeah, no. I also thought he looked cheap in that outfit at the end. I know that was meant to be his like vampire outfit with like the leather. I was like,
yeah,
derivative.
He's young. He's a young vampire. He's figuring things out.
World's oldest twink. Truly, he's the world's oldest twink.
Yeah.
All right, so we've done winner, we've done loser. I want you to give me the most light-skinned moments of book one.
I mean, it's Louis putting that sign up and going back to his white husband. It's Louis doing all this black advocacy, and then I'm like, I'm gonna go sneak back into my bed with my white husband. It's like Louis is just like an eternal light skin moment. Like that's just his life.
Yeah, it's really hard to pinpoint what is the most light skinned Louis moment. That bitch was biting her lip from the first moment I saw her. Like,
baby,
come on now. Yeah, I would say, you know what? I think I'm gonna give it right up to the first episode, the first time we saw Louis in the past. I think when his suit was super starched, he was wearing a yellow hat and a yellow suit, giving high yellow, like God bless, like that is that is who you are, Creole Lady Marmalade. I love you. Yeah, that's my most light skinned moment. That was a good look. Sorry,
he looked good in them suits.
He did. He just looked. We didn't not like gone into horny corner, but like anyone can get it.
Clothes off, face down in the coffin.
Baby, ooh, everyone's fine. Everyone's so hot. Ooh, yes.
If you've not watched this show, but you've like seen gifs of it, it's probably like of those two making out and floating. It's a hot show. Yeah. Sorry, I got distracted. All right, now final question. Can you give me your most chaotic bisexual moment?
The most chaotic bisexual moment. For me, I feel like it's the Marriage Story episode from like top to bottom. It's just like from Daniel showing up and being like, let me take my clothes off because I gotta fuck you for some drugs. And he's like, I just want to talk. And then Louis and Armand just tearing into each other while there's a dead twink in the corner. Just chaos from top to bottom. It was afraid of bisexual Virginia Woolf. And I lived.
God, I really need to rewatch that movie.
Oh, actually, this other one just came to me. You remember in the first season, Lestat was sleeping with that woman, and then Louis rolled up and he's like, why did you make this song about me? I swam across the river for you and you're fucking this woman. Then they start fighting each other and they start fucking again. Chaotic bisexual woman. Catching your man in bed with another woman, fighting and then fucking him in that bed. Chaos.
I agree. I think from my end, I would give the most chaotic bisexual moment, I think, to like that bottom panicky moment we were talking to her about earlier when he told Armand to like get into the coffin ass up. I was like, that's just so aggressive. It feels put on.
It was giving performance. I gotta say, it was a hot performance. I was a little.
I jumped in. Don't get me wrong. Yes. Yeah, I'd be like, do you want me to spray some Febreze in there? Just like air it out before you do. What do you need? Do you want me some satin? Like, I got snacks behind the pillow. Whatever you want, I'm here for you.
Not coffin snacks.
Like little Jello shots of blood. Oh God, what a mess. And yeah, okay, so that completes our podcast episode. Book 1 of Interview with the Vampire. Derek, how was that for you?
Honey, I lived. This was beautiful.
I had a lot of fun. I'm so glad to get. Do you have anything like that we've not touched on that you think you want to get in there before I sign us off for hopefully not the last time? I'm hoping I'll be able to get you back into this room again.
Yeah, hopefully. I think we touched all the important topics. I mean, check out this show. Check it. It's incredible.
Yes.
Give these people their
things. And it's not
things.
too long. It's like British television, like series order. There's like 7 and 8 episodes. They're long, but you'll get through them. Find it, watch it. And hopefully you'll get Derek on at some point for season 3 and maybe something else before then. Yes.
Yes, please do. Anytime.
Trapping you on air. Yes. All right. Thank you. Bye, everyone. Say bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening. You can find Derrick at Paradise Lost. That's Paradise Laust on all socials. Check out Derrick's link tree in the show notes to find out more about his writing and him. You can find me and the podcast everywhere at Also Perp. That's ALSOPURP. Got a bunch of new episodes coming up, like the Got to Be Real retrospective with Miss Sunday, a deep dive into Archie Comics with Karen Schaap. Plus, I just scheduled a conversation on Black girlhood and Daria with a very special guest. If you want to send in any questions about those upcoming episodes, please do to referentialpodcast@gmail.com. Plus a few surprises that I'm really excited to share. You can find out a bit more about what's coming up next on the podcast by going to my website, alsopurple.com/citations. And I think that's it from me. Thank you so much for listening. Leave a review, a nice one. Tell a friend. Okay, goodbye.
Clothes off, face down in the coffin.